Hi, my name is Neil Feit from the SUNY Fredonia Department of Philosophy. This video is going to concern symbolizing English statements into predicate logic, monadic predicate logic. And if you're using the Power of Logic textbook, it'll supplement Chapter 9, Section 1 of that book. Here we have some really simple English statements, simple with respect to how they get symbolized in predicate logic. And I'll give you some information here, okay? Lowercase m is going to be a name for Martha. Bx will be a statement function meaning x is brown. Dx will be a statement function meaning x is a dog. Here in the second one, wx will mean that x is white. Same thing there in the third. Here, sx will mean that x smells. And everything else is already indicated. Okay, so this is the logical vocabulary that we're going to use to symbolize these statements. Okay, looking at the first one here, Martha is a brown dog. This is a singular statement. There's no quantification going on at all. You don't need and you shouldn't have an existential or a universal quantifier to symbolize this statement. This statement simply says that Martha is brown and Martha's a dog, okay? By commutation, you could have the DM to the left of the BM if you wanted to, but that's the way to symbolize that statement, okay? The second one says, not everything is white. Well, one way to symbolize that is to say, for all x, wx, everything is white, and just go back and negate that. Not everything is white, okay? There's an equivalent way to do that. To say that not everything is white is to say that there exists something, there exists an x, such that x is not white. Alrighty? So those are two ways to symbolize that. The first way here is actually as the negation of a very simple quantified formula, and the second one is as a quantified existential formula, and those are logically equivalent. The third statement says that nothing is white, and it's really important not to confuse that with the one above it. Okay, nothing is white and not everything is white are very different statements, not at all logically equivalent. So nothing is white is not going to be the negation of a universal quantifier. That's going to be the negation of an existential quantifier. It's not the case that there is something white. Okay, so nothing is the logical denial or negation of something. Equivalently, if you wanted to symbolize that as a quantifier statement, to say that nothing is white is to say that everything is non-white. So for all x, it's not the case that x is white. So those are two good ways to symbolize that third statement. Again, it's very important to keep in mind that nothing is the negation of an existential quantifier, whereas not everything, or for example, not all, would be the negation of a universal quantifier. Okay? Let me read this fourth sentence to you. If nothing smells, then Martha doesn't smell. Sounds right? Here, you need to notice that the main operator it's not a tilde and it's not a quantifier. The main operator is that if-then conditional here, okay? That's the main operator of that statement. What's the antecedent? Well, the antecedent is nothing smells. Okay? Well, that's similar to nothing is white. It's not the case that there exists something that smells. Okay. What's the consequent? Well, Martha doesn't smell. Well, Martha smells would be SM, so Martha doesn't smell would be tilde SM. So a good tip in general is to take what you've written or typed and read it back into English and see if it captures the meaning of the statement you're trying to symbolize. So I would read this as, if there doesn't exist something that smells, if nothing smells, then it's not the case that Martha smells. Martha doesn't smell. And that captures the meaning of that English statement that I'm trying to symbolize. Okay. Last one here in the simple section, Martha's not a brown dog, okay? You might be tempted to say, well, Martha's brown but not a dog, or Martha's a dog but not brown. But this statement doesn't say that Martha's brown. It could be true even if Martha's, for example, I don't know, a brown cat. And this doesn't say that Martha's not a dog. It could be true if she's, for example, like a gray dog. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want to look up to that top one, and which says Martha is a brown dog. So brown Martha and dog Martha, and basically we want to negate that. So we want to put that whole thing in parentheses, so we're negating the entire formula rather than just one conjunct, and we just want to negate that. It's not the case that Martha's a brown dog. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to some more challenging statements. Okay, here I can give you some information. MX means that X is a musician. Let's say IX means that X owns an iPad. Let's say capital XX means that X owns an Xbox. And after I do this, I invite you to pause the video and practice. And here we have a predicate thinks they're cool. So let's use TX. And if I were putting this on a quiz or exam, I would tell you that TX means X thinks that X is cool. Okay? Here we have AX, X is an actor. PX, X is a person. We already did IX for owns an iPad. Little n, that's me, I'm Neil. Thinks he's cool, we already have as T. Person is already P. Thinks he's cool. Here we have is cool. Well, that's different from thinking that you're cool. So that's CX, let's say, is going to mean X is cool. And all of the statement functions involved in this bottom statement we've already abbreviated up there above them. Okay, so I'm going to make this disappear in just a minute or a moment and symbolize these statements. Alrighty. Musicians who own an iPad or an Xbox think they're cool. This statement doesn't explicitly have a quantifier term in English, but it's clearly a universal claim. It's about all musicians. And if you're putting a formula in predicate logic and you're going to have variables in that formula, x, y, z, you better preface those variables with a quantifier that has them in their scope, in its scope. Okay, so what about this x? Well, we're going to want to say that if x is a musician who owns an iPad or an Xbox. Okay, so I'm going to open two parentheses and I'm going to say musician x, and what about this x? Well, x owns an iPad or an Xbox. So I'm going to open up another parenthesis. X owns an iPad or x owns an Xbox. The parenthesis that I just closed opened the one before the I. So I'm going to close the one that I opened before the M because now I'm going to want to put a conditional there. Okay. What about this musician who owns an iPad or an Xbox? Well, thinks that he or she is cool. Okay. Let me give you two tips here. Okay. Write something down and then read it back into English or Logic10. So for all x, okay, if x is a musician and x owns an iPad or an Xbox, then x thinks that x is cool. All right, that seems to me to capture the meaning of the English statement. Tip 2, confirm that you've opened as many parentheses as you've closed, or vice versa, you've closed as many as you've opened. So here we have open parenthesis, open parenthesis, open parenthesis. We've opened 3, close, close, close. That's going to be an indicator that you've done parentheses correctly. And third, if you're using a universal statement here, your arrow should almost always be the main operator after that statement, and here it is. The arrow is in the least amount of parentheses following that universal quantifier. Okay. Second statement here. Actors are not the only people who own iPads. Well, one way to symbolize that is just to kind of say what this statement means. It means that there are people who own iPads who aren't actors. So, for example, there exists an X such that maybe I'll open two parentheses. What about this X? X is a person, and X owns an iPad, and It's not the case that X is an actor. Okay. So, read it back into English. There exists an X who is a person and owns an iPad, but is not an actor. So actors are not the only people who own iPads. Here I've opened two parentheses and then subsequently closed two parentheses, and that's because we really need to indicate which of those two dots is the main operator after, kind of the second main operator, the main operator after that existential quantifier, okay? It's not a big deal. In fact, it doesn't matter whether your inner parentheses there are around the P and the I or around that second pair, around the I and the not A. Another way to symbolize this statement is to say that not all people who own iPads are actors, and that's logically equivalent. It's not the case that for all X, if X is a person and owns an iPad, then in this case is an actor. Okay. If I forget about that tilde for a moment, this says every person who owns an iPad is an actor, or equivalently, only actors are people who own iPads. Okay. But we want to say actors are not the only people who own iPads, and we just negate that. Okay. And those are two logically equivalent, equally correct ways of symbolizing that statement. Okay. Next one. Neil thinks he's cool, but not every person who thinks he's cool is cool. Okay. Well, this is going to be a conjunction. That but. So the left conjunct is Neil thinks he's cool. Well, T means thinks he's cool, and I'm Neil, and so that's going to be the left conjunct. Now I want to say not every person who thinks he's cool is cool. Well, it's not the case that for all X. Well, what about this X? X is a person who thinks he's cool. So I'm going to open up two parentheses, person X and TX. Then CX is cool. Okay. Let me read this back into English and see if we've captured the meaning. Neil thinks he's cool. But it's not the case that for all X, if X is a person who thinks he's cool, then X is cool. I think that does it. Neil's cool, but not every person who thinks he's cool is cool. Okay. Okay, here I'm going to do the last one. And this one is actually a little tough. Little bit tricky. Some actors and musicians are cool if they think they're cool. Okay, basically this is kind of a lazy way of saying some actors are cool if they think they're cool. So we have to say that. And then kind of some musicians are cool if they think they're cool. Now that's a mess, but we're actually going to have to symbolize this as a conjunction of two existential statements. Okay, so there exists an X. Now what about this X? Well, this X is an actor. Okay, and what about this actor? Well, she's cool if she thinks she's cool. Okay, so I'm going to open up another parentheses. The antecedent here is thinks that X is cool. Then she is cool. And I have to close that parenthesis that I opened before the A. So reading this back into English, there exists an X who is an actor, and if X thinks X is cool, then X is cool. Okay? Seems to capture part of what that sentence is saying. Now I want to say the exact same thing about musicians. Okay, so there exists an X. This time instead of an actor, X is a musician, and the same exact thing. If X thinks that X is cool, then X is cool. Close the second parenthesis that I opened. Close the first parenthesis that I opened. Okay, so those are some challenging symbolizations, but I hope talking through them kind of made sense and maybe puts you in a position to do some of this on your own. I'm actually going to go to the Power of Logic web tutor and just do two really, hopefully short little symbolizations to finish up this video. I'm going to go to the 9.1 exercises here, part F, the challenging translations. Okay, and I'm going to go down to number 10 here first. Fetuses lack a right to life if they are neither humans nor moral agents. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, F is a fetus. Rx means X has a right to life. So lacking a right to life is going to be the opposite of that. H for human, M for moral agent. Okay. So again, this statement doesn't explicitly have a quantifier in it, but it is a universal statement. So for all X, well, basically we're going to want to start this out if X is a fetus. Okay. But what about this lacking a right to life? That's actually going to be the predicate of this statement rather than the subject. The idea is this statement says if you're a fetus, and if you're neither human nor a moral agent, then you lack a right to life. So what I'm going to have to do is going to go back here and open up another parenthesis. So for all X, if X is a fetus, and now I want to say, what do I want to say? X is neither human nor a moral agent. So maybe I'll symbolize that as the negation of an either or. So it's not the case that X is human or a moral agent. Now I just closed the parenthesis before the H, and I'm going to want an arrow here to correspond with my universal quantifier. So I'm going to close that one that I opened before the F, and I'm going to have an arrow be my main operator after. Now, what about this fetus who is neither human nor a moral agent? Well, they lack a right to life. In other words, it's not the case that they have a right to life. Okay, I'm going to try and check that answer. That's one of the more challenging symbolizations in this challenging symbolization exercise, but it tells me that's correct. So a couple of things to be careful about here is how many parentheses to open, how many to close, and if you don't do that correctly, you don't get a well-formed formula. And to think, what is this sentence saying? What's the subject of this sentence? What's the predicate of this sentence? I'm just going to do one more. I can't do them all. I'm actually going to go up to number 8 here. Okay. If everyone is wise, then no one's a fool. One thing to think about here is this English statement has two quantifier phrases, everyone and no one. Okay, that's going to tell you that you're going to have two quantifiers to symbolize this statement. If everyone is wise, then no one's a fool. So that's really good. Excuse me, it's going to be an if-then statement. Okay, and notice that we're told here to use px to mean x is a person. Okay, so everyone here is to be interpreted as every person, and no one is to be interpreted as no person. So basically this sentence is going to say, if every person is wise, so for all x, so basically what I want to say here is every person is wise. So for all x, if x is a person, then x is wise. Okay. No one is a fool. No person is a fool. Well, I'll symbolize that as the negation of an existential. You could symbolize that as a universal if you want. Shift $. It's not the case that there is an x who's a person and a fool. So let me read this back into Logic10. So it's an if-then statement. If all people are wise, then there does not exist someone who's a person and a fool. Then no one is a fool. And I'm going to check that. And we're running up against time here, but that's correct, and I hope this video was helpful to you.